I will never forget the story of the white gorilla. He wasn't albino. He was the product of genetic tinkering, a deliberate creation meant to be displayed, perhaps even sold. They called him Kesi. But what I find truly unforgettable is not the science, but what happened one spring morning when the cherry blossom petals danced in the air. The Rehabilitation Center's cameras captured it all, but no technology could explain the miracle that unfolded. Proof that love knows no limits, that memory is a powerful force, and that even a goodbye can be an experience of pure connection. You see, this white gorilla, Kesi, saw an elderly woman in a wheelchair and, with his own hands, unlocked a lock that had been closed for years. The woman was Emma Carter, who had dedicated 42 years to working with primates, offering them the compassion so often lacking in humans. But nothing in her life was as significant as the night she raided that laboratory. It was 2006, and genetic engineering experiments were gaining traction. Emma, a researcher for an animal rights organization, had been watching a suspicious laboratory for months. That night, she finally got inside, and what she found shook her to her core. In a small cage, in the middle of that cold, sterile room, lay a baby gorilla with fur as white as snow. All the other gorillas were dark, natural-looking. But this infant defied nature, covered in perfect whiteness. Looking at the files, Emma learned the truth. This was a genetically modified gorilla, not an albino, but the result of deliberate intervention. The scientists had tampered with his genetics to display him as a rare species, maybe even to sell him off to some wealthy collector. But at that moment, that tiny creature was living without a mother, without love, merely an experimental object. Something broke within Emma's heart, and she made a decision. She couldn't leave him there. Risking her career, her freedom, even her life, she took Kesi. She named him Kesi, meaning hope in an ancient language, because that's what he was for her. Proof that humanity was still capable of good, that love could be stronger than science. The first days were difficult. Kesi was traumatized. He cried through the nights, trembled in Emma's arms. But Emma didn't give up. She warmed his milk, sang him lullabies for hours, and slowly gained his trust by always being there when he woke up. As months passed, their bond grew stronger. As Kesi grew, his white fur shone even brighter. But he didn't just develop physically. His intelligence, his empathy, and his loving gaze amazed everyone, as if he was receiving back all the love he had lost in that laboratory cell, multiplied. By the time he was 3, Kesi was too big to climb on Emma's shoulder. But he still came to her side every morning, rested his huge head on her knees, and waited for her hands to wander through his fur. This ritual was sacred for Emma, a time for a silent conversation they both shared. She taught Kesi simple things: how to peel fruit, how to play games, even how to open a simple lock. She presented this last skill as a fun activity: a metal lock with small buttons turned in the right sequence. Kesi thought it was a game, but it was one of the most important gifts Emma gave him: the ability to understand the idea of freedom. Years passed. When Kesi turned 10, he weighed over 200 kilos. His white fur literally glowed in the sunlight, and his amber eyes held deep wisdom. Emma could no longer keep him at home. It would be dangerous and wrong. But she found the best solution. The local rehabilitation center agreed to accept Kesi. It was a professional facility designed for injured animals in need of protection, with large areas. Kesi would be safe there, cared for by experts, and free to roam in a large enclosure. The day she took him there, Emma felt something tear inside her. Kesi looked at her, and she saw understanding in those big eyes, as if he knew she thought this was best for him. As she left him, Emma stroked his head one last time and whispered in his ear, "I will always love you, Kesi. You're my son." And Kesi touched Emma's face one last time. Those giant fingers touched hers, as if making a promise that he would never forget her. After that day, Emma visited him every week. She couldn't make direct contact, but watching him from behind the bars was enough. Every time Kesi saw her, he would stand up, place his hands on the bars, and look at her in a way that spoke volumes, as if saying, "Mum, you're here. Everything is." Time was merciless, especially toward Emma. When she reached 65, I remember reading about Emma and Kesi for the first time, and a line from the story stayed with me for days. She understood everything, felt everything, but couldn't fully express anything. It's a chilling thought, to be so trapped within oneself. As Emma's body began to fail her, that's exactly what happened. First, her legs weakened, then her hands trembled. The diagnosis came: amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or motor neuron disease, merciless and progressive. Within a year, she was confined to a wheelchair, her speech slurred, even forming words became a struggle. But her mind remained sharp, her feelings deep. That was the cruelest part of it all. Visiting Kesi, her son, was no longer possible. Her failing health simply wouldn't allow it. Months passed since she last saw him, and the absence gnawed at her. She knew her time was short, and she desperately wanted to see him one last time. Her sister, Sarah, understood. She contacted the Rehabilitation Center, secured special permission, and one spring morning, as cherry blossoms danced in the air, she wheeled Emma to the center. As they made their way through the main path, people stared, but Emma paid them no mind. Her attention was fixed on one thing. In the distance, Kesi stood like a white giant in a large outdoor area. Sarah pushed the wheelchair towards the garden. The spring sun warmed Emma's face. Cherry blossoms landed in her hair, but she only wanted to see him. Kesi, her son. They stopped just before the bars. Kesi had his back turned, sitting on a large rock. Emma tried to call out to him, but only rasping sounds came from her throat. Tears streamed down her face. To be so close, yet unable to see him, was unbearable. Sarah touched her shoulder. "Let me call him," she whispered. But then a miracle seemed to occur. Kesi turned his head. Perhaps he felt the vibration of her sounds, or maybe it was just instinct. His amber eyes locked onto Emma. In that moment, the world fell silent. There was only the woman and the gorilla, mother and son, reunited after years. Slowly, Kesi stood. His massive body, over 200 kilograms, moved with surprising grace. He walked towards the bars, each step filled with purpose. He remembered her. Reaching the bars, he stopped, gripping the metal. His head bowed, his eyes fixed on Emma. Then he made a sound, deep and human-like, as if in pain. One of those characteristic sounds gorillas make when they're sad. Sarah brought the chair closer, until only a meter separated them. The bars were the only barrier. Emma tried to reach out with her trembling hand, but she lacked the strength. Understanding. Kesi extended his own giant hand through the bars. His fingers touched hers. It was like electricity. 10 years. 10 years since she had truly touched him. And now those giant fingers intertwined with hers. Warm, soft, familiar. Kesi's fingers trembled. Was he crying? Could gorillas cry? Emma didn't know, but she knew they were sharing the same pain. A word escaped her lips. Kai. Kesi bowed his head further, leaning against the bars as if trying to hug Emma. And then something extraordinary happened. He pulled his hand back, turned his head slightly, examined the lock on the bars. A simple mechanism Emma had taught him years ago as a game. 3 buttons, turned in a specific sequence, would open it. It was designed to prevent accidental openings by visitors. But Kesi remembered. He turned the first button right, the second left, the third right. A click echoed. The lock opened. Sarah gasped. "Oh my God," she whispered. Security guards, noticing the situation on the monitors, panicked. The alarm sounded, but Emma felt no fear. She looked into Kesi's eyes and saw only love. Slowly, Kesi pushed the door open. The metal creaked, and the giant gorilla, for the first time in 10 years, stepped outside freely. Security teams came running, armed with tranquilizer darts and guns. "Get back!" someone shouted. "The animal has gotten loose." But Kesi ignored them. He only looked at Emma, moving towards her with slow, careful steps, as if approaching something fragile. Sarah froze behind the chair, unable to move. Emma gestured with her hand, struggling to speak. "Let him?" she managed to say. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, not wanting to leave her sister alone with the giant animal. But seeing the determination in Emma's eyes, she slowly backed away. One of the security team shouted, "No, get away from there. This is very dangerous." I'll never forget the day I heard about Emma and Kesi. "Stop," she'd said, a sternness in her voice that surprised everyone. Kesi, this massive gorilla, was right in front of her, his shadow engulfing her small frame. And then, slowly, he crouched down, lowering himself until their faces were almost level. His giant hand reached out, his fingers touching Emma's face with unbelievable gentleness. He caressed her cheek, picked a cherry blossom petal from her hair, studied it, and then softly placed it on the ground. Then he rested his huge head on her knees. Everyone froze. Security, visitors, staff. No one even breathed. It wasn't just animal behavior they were witnessing. It was the meeting of 2 souls, almost like a mother and son saying farewell after years apart. Emma raised a trembling hand, touched Kesi's head, and felt that familiar, warm, soft fur between her fingers. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they weren't from pain, but gratitude. Kesi made a sound then, a strange, almost human-like whimpering, the kind gorillas make only in moments of profound emotion. It was as if he was saying, "Mom, you're here. I missed you." "I never forgot you." Words, difficult and choppy, fell from Emma's lips. "I love you, Kesi." He lifted his head slightly, looking at her. There were no tears in his amber eyes, but there was an understanding, an acceptance, as if he knew Emma wouldn't be with him for much longer. His giant hand reached for the wheelchair's armrest, carefully examining the metal edges. Then he placed his hand on hers. Their hands joined under the falling cherry blossoms. Emma realized Kesi was being so careful, so controlled, making not to bump the wheelchair. He knew she was fragile, and he wanted to protect her. Minutes drifted by. No one dared to interfere. The security teams lowered their weapons. It was clear. This wasn't a threat. This was love. Dr. Alan Thompson, the center's director, stepped forward. His eyes welled up behind his glasses. He had worked with animals for so long, but he had never seen a bond like this. "The most extraordinary thing I've ever witnessed," he said, his voice trembling. "This is something even science can't explain." Sarah was crying, and other visitors silently shed tears. Everyone understood this wasn't just a woman and a gorilla. It was a universal bond, the bond between mother and child, a love that transcended species, time, and distance. Kesi slowly lifted his head, looked at Emma one last time, and then wiped the tears from her eyes with his finger. The movement was so human, so compassionate and protective. When the door closed, Kesi stood there, leaning against the bars, motionless and silent, just watching Emma. Sarah moved behind the wheelchair. "Should we go?" she asked, her voice trembling. Emma nodded slightly. Yes, it was time. But something wasn't breaking inside her. This was... I've always been fascinated by the bonds between species, those connections that defy our expectations. The story of Emma and Kesi is one that has stayed with me. It's a story about a woman and a gorilla, a bond so profound it transcended the boundaries of species. But their final farewell, that was something truly special. As Kesi's chair turned, he made a sound, a long, pain-filled call, the kind gorillas reserve for the most profound moments, a mother's or a son's call. It was a real farewell, and they both knew it. The people around us fell silent, stunned. Some cried, others simply looked on in shock. It wasn't normal animal behavior. It felt like a miracle. Back home, Sarah made tea for Emma, but she couldn't drink it. She felt empty, as if a part of her remained with Kesi. That night, Emma lay in bed, remembering the day she first saw Kesi, that tiny white infant, and the promise she made. "I will protect you. I will love you." And she had kept that promise every day, every moment, doing what was best for him. Days turned into weeks. Sarah brought news of Kesi, saying he was doing well, but she left something unsaid. Every evening at sunset, Kesi would come to the bars and look at the last place Emma had stood. 2 months later, Emma woke up struggling to breathe. Her illness had progressed. She refused an ambulance, wanting to stay home in peace. That night, under the full moon, a strange feeling overcame her, as if Kesi were beside her, his giant hand touching hers once more. She closed her eyes, imagining him, his white fur, amber eyes, and gentle hands. She remembered that perfect day, cherry blossoms dancing in the air, the sun illuminating everything. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for letting me love you, Kesi." And that night, Emma fell asleep peacefully. The next morning, Sarah found her. Emma was gone, but a smile graced her face, a peaceful, happy expression, as if she had seen a beautiful dream. Dr. Thompson wept when he heard the news. Emma had not only saved an animal's life, but given him a loving, meaningful one. How would they tell Kesi? How do you explain death to a gorilla who loved so deeply? But Kesi already knew. That morning, he didn't come to the bars. He didn't break his routine. He sat in the farthest corner of his area, head bowed, motionless, as if in mourning. Dr. Thompson made a decision. He asked Sarah for Emma's favourite shawl and, in the early hours, left it in Kesi's area. When Kesi saw it, he froze. He approached, smelled it, and his giant body trembled. He grasped the shawl, brought it to his face, and inhaled deeply. It was Emma's scent, lavender and daisy. He had never forgotten it. Gently, he pressed the shawl to his chest, bowing his head. From that day on, Kesi slept with the shawl every night. In the morning, he would carry it with him, protecting it as if it were a treasure. It was his way of maintaining his connection with Emma. Months passed. Kesi slowly returned to normal, eating, playing, living. But every evening at sunset, he would take the shawl and sit by the bars. Perhaps, in a way, Emma was always there, in every cherry blossom petal, in every ray of sunlight, in Kesi's heart, just as Kesi was in hers. A year later, the Rehabilitation Centre erected a monument in Emma's memory, made of white marble. A figure of a woman and a gorilla, hand in hand. The Indian read, Emma Carter, 1964 to 2026. She taught that love knows no language, species, or barrier. On the day of the unveiling, Sarah and Kesi were there. From behind the bars, he watched silently. Sarah went to his side, looking into his amber eyes, filled with sadness and gratitude. "You loved my sister very much, didn't you?" she said, tears in her eyes. Kesi bowed his head slightly, confirming. "She loved you very much too," Sarah said. "Know that." Kesi made a soft, sweet, sad sound, one of those rare sounds with which gorillas express their deepest feelings. Years passed. Kesi lived a long and happy life. Grey strands appeared in his white fur, but the sparkle in his eyes never faded, and he carried Emma's shawl with him until the end. One autumn morning, Kesi peacefully passed away. Veterinarians said his heart had stopped, but caretakers believed something else. He finally went to be with Emma. They buried Kesi next to Emma's monument, writing, Kesi, 2006 to 2023. He knew what love was, and he never forgot it. That night, the full moon illuminated both graves. Emma and Kesi, mother and son, two souls, finally together again. And even though it wasn't the season, cherry blossom petals danced in the wind, as if Emma and Kesi were somehow still showing their love. Sometimes the smallest details can hold the greatest weight. It's easy to overlook the quiet moments, the simple acts of companionship. But I've learned that these are often the things that define us, the things that linger long after the grand gestures fade. I find myself particularly moved by the thought of them being together. Just that. No grand pronouncements, no sweeping declarations. Simply, they were together. It's a small phrase, a quiet sentiment, but it speaks volumes about connection and shared experience.